It's a great pleasure now to introduce our next guest. A very warm welcome to the Raqs Media Collective.
Those four here.
No, I need these papers here. We cannot have them. Oh. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, we need to move the papers. Now, if the papers go in this order, all the questions will be in this order. So it could be a drama. No, you should sit in there. We've interviewed many times before, and actually the last interview I did with you was a pizza interview. It's the first time ever, because there are all kinds of interviews on airplanes, interviews outdoors. This is an outdoors interview, interviews in taxis, interviews in the move, interviews in studios, but I think the interview with you was the first time ever a pizza interview. So today is the first chapter in this evolutive interview, and I wanted to ask you the same question I asked throughout the day, the question about the beginnings. Was there a Raqs epiphany?
Well, for me it was that after seeing a Hitchcock film in Shakuntalam, which was a theatre which used to show 4 films a day, and we used to land up seeing continuously 4 films. We came out and three of us were chatting, having tea outside, and we were trying.
The acoustics good?
Yeah. We were trying to find a name for ourselves, and the word not good.
Mike.
Up. Okay. There is no competition now. So we were trying to give ourselves a name, and the word Raqs surfaced. Yeah. This is fine, no? Yeah. Word Raqs surfaced, and it was a word that brought in so many resonances and so many different kind of vibrations that it kind of stayed as a moment which always I recall, because you have to give yourself an image that carries forward a long time for you. So it was in that sense a very epiphanic presence of others in my life.
And can you tell us about the first Raqs work ever?
That would be in the category of the unrealized project. So it's kind of hard to start by saying that you didn't start. And I think yes, it was a. We of course began with the biggest ambition. We were going to rewrite the history of how photography, the relationship with the colony, the native, war. All of these were going to be rewritten, because we were working on this research in the Andaman Islands, and in which you saw over 100 years, almost the entire history of mankind, from hunting-gathering tribes till the Second World War, and the making of the nation, the national project in that sense. That one never got made. So history is still waiting to be rewritten in that area at least.
But a lot of work gets made at the moment, and it's a very exciting moment, because you have soon your 20th anniversary. I think next year will be 20 years of Raqs, and I thought it would be great for this interview today to do a little bit of a mapping of all the projects you're working on at the moment. One of the most recent projects I saw yesterday in the same exhibition, where also Geeta Kapoor's and Vivian Sundaram's archive is shown, where Ammar's films are shown. We discussed tonight where Subodh Gupta is also participating. You show a new piece about the ulterior intimacy of digits, and it's very much a wheel which spins in 2 directions, because it's actually related to an image which went from here to England, which you bring back here. Can you tell us about this ulterior intimacy of digits?
And it's actually related to the first unrealized work, because
Right.
Is that
working now?
Yeah.
I'm the one with the bad mic.
on नहीं किया क्या?
It's on.
तो वहाँ पे बात कर.
Hello. You are on.
Right, sorry. Back with the bang. No, I was saying that the ulterior intimacy of digits work is actually related to that first and yet unrealized project, because that was looking at the measurement of the human form as a kind of trope, or as a parable for ways of constraining the human condition. And that's a concern that stayed with a lot of our work, the unmeasurability of what it is to be human. The work that you're referring to is an archival trace treated and made to come alive, the archival trace of a handprint from 1858. We know the name of the person whose hand it was, Raj Konai. He was a peasant from southern Bengal, and the handprint was traced by William Herschel, then revenue collector in ink, and sent to the laboratory of Francis Galton, the eugenicist and great measurer and almost mad measurer of human beings, which is where we first encountered it. Interestingly enough, during our researches about the Andaman film many years ago, in the 20th century, and that stayed with us as have many other tropes, and that's what has sort of come back to haunt us in this work.
And in a sense, as much as the work is about the past, it's also about the future, because ulterior intimacy of digits, the acronym, which Raqs is not, but the acronym of that is UID, which is the UID card is what the government is now setting out.
The unique identification database.
So that it's the future. I mean, because this handprint was the kind of the source of much of fingerprinting experiments and technologies that are now guiding how you measure the self for the state. So it's kind of a cycle of the past and the future, which we have to think through as we live in the present.
Now, another project you're working on at the moment is in Paris. It has to do with the festival d'Automne. There is a collaboration with performance and theater. You do a collaboration with Chowdhury, which is actually I think you write the text, and there's going to be a performance. Can you tell me about this collaboration with the Festival d'Automne? I think it will lead then also to an even bigger project, which will happen in the Communist Party headquarters, and I was wondering if that all leads to a kind of a Gesamtkunstwerk. I always wanted to ask you about the Gesamtkunstwerk. Is the Gesamtkunstwerk something Raqs aims at?
Always. No, I think
no lack of ambition ever.
Yeah, I think it was very interesting listening to Sadanand speak just before us, and those 3 or 4 years that he was referring to, those glory years of the arts pages of the Economic Times, amongst those the slightly mad young people who wrote for it were the 3 of us. And one of the reasons why I'm talking about that now is that we were maybe 21, 22, 24, and we were writing and reading while we were writing, between and across cinema, theater, the visual arts, documentary film. And in that sense, that the education that writing for that page gave to all 3 of us, and you have to realize that writing for that page also meant endless conversations between the 3 of us. So Sadanand doesn't quite know what he's responsible for. All the agreements and disagreements and quarrels that have continued for 20 years, which actually animates this desire to be in this kind of kinesis, this restlessness and flux, while being within practices and disciplines, but across and constantly transgressing the boundaries. So perhaps the desire for theatre also is a result of a way of thinking about theatre that was a part of our practice. And it similarly, whether it's architecture or whether it's film or even software, the various forms that we've inhabited and continue to inhabit are in a sense way stations for us to think about the difficulty of being pinned down in any particular form. We've always said that when faced with an intensification of scrutiny, you must encounter that with an amplification of guile. Now perhaps these forms of play that we are producing are ways for us to evade that intensification of scrutiny which the projects like the unique identification database demand of us.
And can you tell me how from there it will go into the Oskar Niemeyer Communist Party, because I think that will have to do with light and
No, we were invited, and we were looking for a space we were invited to suggest some idea of a public a kind of a public project but we were interested in public project doesn't mean anything if you are not aware or inhabit a space. So we were discussing with the curator about a space that could be interesting for us with a kind of a internal turbulent history of it. So he suggested, why didn't you go to Oscar Niemeyer's building of the PCF, which is an incredible building, and where the idea of future, idea of secrecy, and idea of fluid space all come together in this incredible structure. So what we found interesting was that would be a very idle, interesting space to rethink this relationship between certain form of secretive practice and hierarchical forms with a certain ideas of future, which kind of always get melted in the different interstices. So we proposed a project in the ground floor. It is the ground floor of the building. So I don't know whether it comes through or not. So it's an attempt to connect some of our concerns.
Now, another project you're working on at the moment has to do with Jacques Rancière's La Nuit des Prolétaires, and that's interesting because we talked a lot today about history, about workers' archive, about all kinds of different archives, about memory, about protest against forgetting. That archive has been one of the most frequent things which popped up, and wondering if you can tell us a little bit about this new project related to Rancière. And I'm very interested in your view on archives. I mean, the sort of whole idea about the museum or the art institution in the 21st century, the sort of necessity or the question if there is a necessity for archives playing a bigger role.
I just started. One of the things that have always, it is interesting in the last 20 years especially, this whole thing around the archives in India, and you find so many archives being produced. And what is interesting, I think it is a moment in which the demise of some form of confident storytelling and the revival of different other histories come together. Like Walter Benjamin very eloquently said, and Hannah Arendt makes a very beautiful case for it, is that after the First World War, when the soldiers come back, they come back mute without stories. And this is one of the first events in human history where there is no stories from the trenches. It is kind of a mute. And she says maybe that is the time when this disconnect happens between, and classic Benjamin storyteller does evoke that loss. Maybe we see this disconnect now in forms of a capacity to produce stories, and the kind of sense of loss and the kind of retrieval tendencies. And I think that our interest in the archive has this kind of double tension between ability to reenact and activate it, and also to retrieve something that would otherwise lose our attention.
In a sense, it's always like when you're trying to find an image, that the fact that the image is, for example, is never available to you, it's never accessible. You must always seek to find it, and that is, in a sense, the entire process of trying to make a work. And thinking about Knights of Labour, there's so many connections. I mean, the piece that you've seen at the Art Summit, the voltage of revolt. Thinking about, that was the starting point to think about the Oscar Niemeyer building and what we might do there with light bulbs. And can you measure revolt? Is there an electric charge to revolt? How does one look at that in the history of that building? But then all of this is kind of a historical kind of reading. And what was interesting for us about the Rancière book is really about how does one have the luxury to imagine one's exhaustion, and how does one imagine the night not as a place of reproduction of the self for tomorrow, but sort of take it back. And then for us the question really is, how does one find an image for that? Can one find an image for that, even as one sort of thinks about the philosophy or thinks about the theory of it? But that is right now, honestly right now, that is the question for us. Can one imagine an image or find an image? And in a sense they're both together for us. Sometimes the finding is completely imaginary, comes from that, and sometimes it's reality which sort of demonstrates it to you.
Now the archive question leads us also to the institution for the 21st century. And I was wondering if you would imagine the art center or museum for the 21st century, given the fact that there needs to be public institutions in India, and the three of you could invent it. How would it look? How would your Fun Palace look?
Well, we did invent an institution for the 21st century. You know, in the year 2000, we co-founded Sarai along with several other colleagues, Ravi Sundaram and Ravi Vasudevan, and while it may or may not last, into the 21st century, but I think that the desire was to create a situation where one could begin to have conversations that either were dormant or did not occur before, or create conditions in which people had the freedom to speak or remain silent as they chose, to transgress the limitations and boundaries of their practice that had been placed from without, and to find and discover new modes of being and new modes of practice. And the whole effort at refusing this binary between theory and practice, between art and intellectual work, between all sorts of divisions that seek to sunder ourselves from the multiplicities within us. So, I mean, I don't think we are going to be very good at thinking about museums, but we can have a role in provoking what may happen despite the museum.
Great definition. Now, the last question. It's another so far unrealized project, but it's a different type of unrealized project. It's about to be realized. You collaborate very closely with Nickel Hirsch, who is here tonight, the German architect between Frankfurt and Delhi, and it's a building which the four of you conceived. Can you tell us about this project and where in Delhi and how exactly it's going to happen?
It's not four of us conceived, it's actually conceived by 50 people. It's actually conceived in a very intensive series of workshops and relays that have been going for last 10 years with about 450 young people of Delhi, and involving many other people from Sarai, Ankur, many other places. The idea was that that's one of the ideas that we have emerged over the last 10 years while doing Sarai, is to build kind of micro infrastructure of intellectual life, in a sense that intellectual life, not in a fashionable sense, but life of the mind that can disperse and stay in many parts of the city, which is there, active, but to find infrastructures that can speak that give it a validity, give it a value, give it a kind of force. So the building was conceived through this process. It is I think one of the smallest public building if it ever gets made. It is 6 into 3 meters. It's a plot size in one of the resettlement colonies that newly got made in the last 10 years all over the peripheries of the city. It's supposed to be situated in one of the places run by the people there, run by young people there who have been in the conversations with people from Sarai and Ankur for a long time. But that building in the last 2.5 years has faced a lot of problem of getting sanctioned, because what is interesting is it's supposed to be a building made in a neighborhood where the plot 6 by 3 meters plot has been given for housing. 6 by 3 meters is a very small piece of plot. The thing is that we have had probably hundreds of meetings to convince that this could be a kind of a beautiful building that is a neighborhood building to be used as a library, as an archive, as a place to learn, to meet, to do performance, to think, is something very difficult to convince. And I think one of the most interesting things that we learned from this last 2 years is that this kind of environment, the life of mind of this kind of spaces is very easy to conceive. But the moment we leave these spaces and move to other spaces, this form of life is unavailable as a conceptual ground. It's almost impossible to convince someone that this form of life is not an alien form of life. It's a very much desired part of any social fabric. So this building has become a challenge. Hopefully in some form we'll realize it, and since there is so many of us trying to get it done, hopefully it will find and Mr. Nickel Hirsch has been patient for last 3 years refining it.
One very last question. Now that Raqs celebrates the 20th birthday, what would be your advice to a young artist? The Rainer Maria Rilke question.
Read it.
Wow.
So, there's only one strategy to reply to a question like that, is to read Rainer Maria Rilke back to you. Think, dear sir, of the world you carry within you, and call this thinking what you will, whether it be remembering your own childhood or yearning toward your own future. Only be attentive to that which rises up in you, and set it above everything that you observe about you.
Thank you so very, very much. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Jibe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sudha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee.